When I was just 14, my parents looked me dead in the eye and told me I was nothing more than a burden. My mother's tone was as frigid as her expression when she said, "We can't keep wasting our lives on you." My father didn't argue. Instead, he dragged out a black trash bag, stuffed my clothes inside, shoved it into my hands, and slammed the door after saying, "You'll figure it out. Or you won't. Either way, you're not our problem anymore." I found myself standing on the sidewalk, clutching that sagging bag. Everything I owned reduced to scraps. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. To them, I no longer existed. Neighbors peeked from their curtains and whispered, but no one came forward. I was 14, scared, hungry, and completely alone. The years crawled by. I survived off scraps, scraped through odd jobs, and built a life from the pieces they swore I'd never hold together. I thought the worst was behind me, until 12 years later when I walked into my grandfather's funeral in a borrowed suit, only to see my parents arrive in gleaming luxury cars. They laughed, draped in jewels, acting as though they owned the world. And when word spread that Grandpa had left behind a $42 million estate, their voices rose, demanding their share. The room went silent as the lawyer unfolded his papers. He looked around, then paused on me. A small smile tugged at his lips before he read, "The heir to everything is the one who kept my secret safe." Then he pointed at me. That night long ago, when I was thrown out, my childhood ended. Survival became my only concern. While other kids my age worried about homework or football games, I was figuring out where I could sleep without being robbed. The first week was the hardest. I carried that trash bag from block to block, too proud to beg, too scared to ask for help. Hunger clawed at me so fiercely that one night I hid behind a diner until the cook tossed out garbage bags. I dug through them and found half a sandwich. That was dinner. I told myself then I would never forget what it felt like to be treated as less than human. The hunger and cold weren't the worst part. It was the silence from the people who were supposed to love me. My mother, Clarice, cared more about appearances than affection. To her, kids were just accessories, and I was a defective one. My father, Damon, was harsher. His words cut like judgments. If I brought home anything less than perfect grades, he'd sneer, "A Callaway should never be average." Not once did he ever tell me he was proud. When they shut me out, they didn't just close the door. They shattered any illusion that family meant unconditional love. My younger sister Mira was 12 when it happened. I still remember her face pressed to the upstairs window, her hand tapping against the glass as I walked away. She was crying until my parents yanked her back. That image haunted me through every dark night. She was the only one who looked at me like I mattered, but she was trapped in their world, forced into silence. The only thread of connection I had left was my grandfather, Silas Calloway, Damon's father. His weathered face carried both authority and quiet kindness. He wasn't soft-spoken, but his actions carried meaning. He had built a small chain of businesses from nothing, and while most feared him, I knew better. He didn't pity me, he respected the fight in me. Every few months, when I was barely hanging on, I'd notice him watching from a distance. Once, he slipped me a folded $20 with a grunt, muttering, "Don't waste it." That was his way of caring. I learned to survive. I washed dishes, pumped gas, shoveled snow, mowed lawns. Every dollar proof that I didn't need Clarice or Damon. School was harder. Some nights I slept in parks or shelters, yet I still showed up to class. Teachers suspected, but I lied. Pride kept me silent. By 16, I had perfected the art of blending into the background. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for help. I just pushed forward. The rejection burned inside me, but it hardened into determination. When people told me I looked tired, I smiled. When they asked about my parents, I told them they were busy. The truth? They were too busy pretending I didn't exist. Through it all, one memory kept me going. Grandpa Silas once told me, "The measure of a man isn't who stands with him when it's easy. It's who he becomes when no one stands at all." At the time, I didn't fully understand, but those words became my compass. By 18, I had saved enough for a tiny room above a hardware store. At 20, I was juggling 2 jobs while taking night classes at community college. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I wasn't anyone's burden. I wasn't anyone's mistake. I was building my own life. Still, shadows lingered. I wondered if Mira remembered me, if she ever asked about me, or if my parents had erased my name entirely. I wondered if Silas had defended me when they slandered me. Those questions gnawed at me, but I buried them under work. Then came the phone call. A cousin I barely knew told me Grandpa had passed, and the funeral would be at the family estate, the same house I hadn't seen since the night I was cast out. I didn't have much. A borrowed suit, tight shoes, a car that coughed more than it drove. But I knew I had to go. For the first time in years, I would stand before the people who abandoned me. I wasn't the boy they discarded anymore. I was the man I had fought tooth and nail to become. The morning of the funeral felt heavy the moment I woke. I fumbled with the collar of a borrowed shirt that didn't quite fit and caught my reflection in the cracked mirror above my tiny room over the hardware store. The face looking back was worn beyond its years, but the eyes held something my parents had always missed, a steady resolve. This visit wasn't only about saying goodbye to Grandpa. It was me returning to the life that had thrown me away, determined to prove I'd survived. When I pulled up to the Callaway estate, the drive was a parade of immaculate black cars, Mercedes, Bentleys, even a Rolls at the front. I slid my sputtering sedan into a hidden spot and walked up the gravel alone. Wealthy guests in tailored black drifted past as if I were invisible. Some may have recognized me, but nobody stopped. Stepping back into that house brought a rush of memories, polished wood, expensive cologne, and the ghost of childhood laughter now replaced by whispers and a string quartet. At the center of the room lay my grandfather's casket, simple and dignified, a stern photo on top, the man who had been the only one to see value in me. Then I saw my parents. Clarice glided in wearing pearls and a perfectly managed expression of grief. Damon followed, erect and calculating, scanning the room like a man assessing assets. Uncle Rhett hovered nearby, his smugness already betraying hunger for what would come next. They noticed me almost immediately. Clarice's mouth tightened. She mouthed something to Damon, whose reply, "He shouldn't even be here," sliced through the air, though it wasn't aimed at anyone in particular. I walked to the casket and laid my hand on the polished wood. "Thank you for remembering," I whispered to Grandpa. When I turned, Mira stood at the edge of the room, 24 now, and for a heartbeat I saw the little sister who had pressed her face to the window the night I left. She didn't come forward. My parents' presence kept her frozen. Her eyes, though, said everything. I had been missed. The ceremony unfolded, praises for Silas's industry and legacy, but everyone's attention was elsewhere. When it ended, Mr. Hayes, the lawyer, stepped up with a thick folder. The room went taut. This was the moment the family had been holding its breath for. He read minor bequests first, donations, small gifts, distant properties. Tension mounted with every line until he paused and announced the remainder, $42 million. Head snapped forward. Rhett grinned. Damon adjusted his tie. Clarice dabbed at a handkerchief she didn't need. Finally, the lawyer said, "The heir to the majority of my estate will not be the loudest or the one who demands the most. The heir will be the person who kept my secret safe." Confusion spread through the crowd. Questions and murmurs. Mr. Hayes closed the folder, scanned a room, and then with small, knowing smile, pointed straight at me. The sound of gasps filled the hall. Damon leapt to his feet. "This is a mistake," he barked. Clarice clutched her pearls, shaking her head in disbelief. Rhett pounded the arm of his chair. Every gaze swung to me. My chest tightened and my pulse thundered, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I wasn't the discarded boy. I was the one holding the secret none of them understood. The room exploded after the lawyer pointed at me. My father's voice cut through first, furious and sharp. "This is absurd. That boy hasn't been part of this family in over a decade. How could he be the heir?" Uncle Rhett scoffed and taunted Mr. Hayes to stop joking. My mother's face contorted with anger. She gripped my father's arm and hissed, "Damon, stop this nonsense now." She sounded less grief-stricken than terrified of losing what she expected to inherit. Mr. Hayes remained composed, adjusting his glasses. "This was your father's wish," he said. "The will is clear. The heir is the one who kept his secret safe." Then, fixing his gaze on me, he asked, "Aaron, do you still have the box your grandfather gave you?" The question reverberated. My father's face flushed with rage, and for a moment the funeral hall dissolved. I was 15 again, curled under a broken fire escape in winter, numb and starving, nearly ready to give up. Footsteps echoed and Silas appeared in his heavy coat, studying me with equal parts disappointment and pride. He knelt, placed a worn wooden box in my lap, and warned me not to open it until the time was right. "Promise me," he said, "guard this with your life. If you keep it safe, you'll understand why I chose you." I promised. He told me I was the only one he trusted, that I wanted only love, not his riches, and that made me stronger than the rest. For years, that box went everywhere with me, from shelters to cheap rooms. Often I nearly pawned it for food, but Silas's words held me back. The box became both burden and anchor, proof that someone believed in me. Back in the hall, all eyes were on me as I reached beneath my chair, pulled out my satchel, and set the same wooden box on the lawyer's table. The brass lock gleamed beneath the chandelier. Gasps swelled louder. My father lunged, insisting it proved nothing. I could have stolen it. Mr. Hayes raised a hand. "No, Damon. Your father documented everything. He entrusted this box to Aaron. Its contents will show who honored his final wish." Clarice wept outrage. "We raised him. We sacrificed for him, and he abandoned us. How dare you reward betrayal?" For the first time, I didn't shrink. I met her calmly. "You didn't sacrifice for me. You threw me away because I was inconvenient. Grandpa treated me like I mattered. I promised him, and I kept that promise." Silence fell. Rhett folded his arms, sour and resentful. Mira shifted uneasily, eyes darting between us, lips pressed as if keeping words back. Mr. Hayes stepped forward. "Aaron, do you wish to open it now?" The box felt heavier than ever. It had been my shield and burden for 12 years. I hesitated, afraid it might be empty or that the promise was merely a test, but I felt Silas there and knew this was the moment it had led to. "Yes," I said. My father scoffed and turned away, fists clenched. My mother hissed, "This can't be happening." Mr. Hayes produced a small key from his pocket, explaining that Silas had left instructions that only I should open it. He set the key in the lock. My hand shook as I steadied the box. The lock clicked. The lid creaked. Inside lay a worn leather journal and an envelope sealed in red wax. Gasps erupted around the room. My father took an involuntary step forward and scoffed in disbelief. "That's it. A box of papers." Mr. Hayes lifted the journal gingerly. "These are Silas Calloway's writings, his reflections, accounts, and truths," he announced. Per Silas's instruction, the pages were to be read aloud only if Aaron presented the box intact. Clarice scoffed, voice sharp with scorn. "This is theater. Silas would never empower that boy." The lawyer ignored her and began to read. Silas's voice came through the ink. He had built a fortune, yes, but wealth wasn't the measure of a person. Character was. "Character," he wrote, "shows itself through loyalty and sacrifice, not greed." As the entries unfolded, the room reacted. Damon sneered, Rhett folded his arms, and Mira leaned forward, rapt. Hayes read the bequests aloud. Damon received nothing. Silas accused him of stealing from the company to cover debts. Rhett got nothing. He only sought to outshine Silas instead of honoring the family name. Clarice, married into the family, was left out for valuing vanity over love. Clarice clutched at the words as if struck. "He's lying. Tell me he's lying," she demanded of Damon. He only tightened his jaw. Hayes continued. Mira was left with hope, an exhortation to free herself from their parents' cruelty, but everything else was bequeathed to Aaron, because when the world deserted him, he had not deserted Silas. He had kept Silas's secret. Hayes then opened the sealed envelope. Inside were the legal documents, titles, and account information, the full inventory of the Calloway fortune. He spread it on the table. The room dissolved into uproar. Damon stormed to the papers, denouncing the will as a farce and insisting Silas had been senile or manipulated. Hayes, steady, replied that the documents were notarized 3 years earlier and completely valid. Rhett threatened court. Clarice accused me of ruining the family. I met her without shrinking. My voice stayed steady as I told the truth. They hadn't sacrificed for me. They'd thrown me away when it was convenient. Grandpa had trusted me because I never betrayed him. Mira, finally finding the courage to speak, stood and backed me up. I was stronger than anyone had claimed. She confessed she wanted to reach out but had been too afraid. Hayes pronounced the will final. The estate, businesses, and accounts belonged to Aaron Calloway. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. My parents froze as the reality of their loss settled in. Rhett stormed off, vowing I'd regret this. As they left, Their designer shoes clicked a retreating cadence across the floor. Left standing with the journal in Hayes's hand, I felt the sudden, heavy shift of responsibility descend on me, a crown I hadn't asked for. But Mira stayed by my side, and for the first time in years I knew I wasn't alone. She spoke softly, apologetic and tentative. She had wanted to write and wanted to find me, but fear and our parents had kept her silent. I told her she was only a child then, and it wasn't her fault. She admitted she'd never stopped caring. I told her neither had I. When she whispered, "Maybe we can start again," I felt something like warmth. Mr. Hayes set the journal in my hands. He reminded me that Silas, though tough, wasn't blind. He'd seen through the greed and recognized honor. He wanted me to know I'd never been forgotten. I opened the journal and read the last line aloud. My heir was the one who understood that trust was worth more than gold. The sentence settled into me. The inheritance was more than money. It was forgiveness, validation, and a charge to live up to the trust someone had placed in me. As I walked out of the estate with Mira at my side, the winter sun was breaking through the clouds. It cast light across the driveway where hours earlier my parents had paraded in their luxury cars. Now those cars were gone, leaving only silence. For the first time in years, I felt no anger toward them. They had tried to bury me, but in doing so they proved what I had always known. Family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by love, loyalty, and truth. In the weeks that followed, the world changed. Lawyers transferred accounts. Papers were signed. Properties shifted under my name. Headlines whispered about the Callaway fortune moving to the grandson no one had spoken of in years. My parents tried to contest, but the evidence in the journal shut every door they opened. My uncle's threats faded into silence once his own misdeeds came to light. But the greatest change wasn't in the bank accounts or the business boardrooms. It was in me. For the first time, I wasn't fighting just to survive. I was living with purpose. I remembered the boy who had once eaten from trash bags, shivering in alleys, carrying a box he didn't understand. That boy had kept his promise, and that promise had become the foundation of everything I now held. Mira visited often. She helped me sort through the journal, reading stories about Silas that made us laugh and cry. She confessed her regrets, and I assured her that none of this was her fault. We were rebuilding something together, something that had been broken but not lost. And in quiet moments, I sat alone with the journal, running my fingers across my grandfather's words. I thought of what he had given me. Not just money, not just property, but the truth that my worth had never depended on the approval of those who abandoned me. My worth had always been in the promises I kept, the integrity I held when no one was watching. Looking back now, I realized that the inheritance was never about the fortune. It was about vindication. It was about showing that resilience and loyalty could outlast betrayal. It was about proving that the boy cast aside as a burden could rise to stand taller than those who tried to erase him. You may feel abandoned, betrayed, or forgotten, but your value is not defined by those who fail to see it. Your value is defined by the promises you keep, by the fight you refuse to give up, by the love you choose to protect even when the world turns away. When I signed the final papers and placed my name on the inheritance, I didn't feel revenge. I felt peace. Because in the end, I didn't just gain a fortune. I gained back my voice, my dignity, and the knowledge that I had never been the burden they claimed I was. And as I look forward now, I know one thing with certainty. The greatest inheritance my grandfather left me was not the money, but the reminder that loyalty, resilience, and truth are worth more than $42 million.